It only took him winning and then being hospitalized for the New York Times to come clean on exactly what seems to be going on there. His adjustment, this is quoting, his adjustment to serving in the Senate has been made vastly more difficult by the strains of his recovery, which left him with a physical impairment and serious mental health challenges that have rendered the transition extraordinarily challenging, even with the accommodations that have been made to help him adapt. His chief of staff is quoted as saying, what you're supposed to do to recover from this, meaning this stroke that almost killed him in May, is to do as little as possible. And he has done quite the opposite. He's being monitored, we're told, for seizures. They believe they've ruled out a second stroke. But we had a doctor on yesterday talking, Victor, about how the fact that he had both a pacemaker and a defibrillator implanted after that stroke is alarming and tells us that this may have been a lot more complex than they let on. They have never released his medical records. We've never heard from a cardiologist. We've only heard from a general care physician that he was, quote, fit to serve. And now we're on day 3 of a hospital stay that we still probably won't get the medical records on. And now the man is Senator John Fetterman. What do you make of it?
Well, it's kind of analogous to how they viewed Joe Biden. Joe Biden had cognitive challenges. Everybody knew that. He campaigned in a 19th century style in his basement. And his role was to get them across the finish line and turn over his agenda to the hard left. And now you're starting to see a little leaking about Joe's cognitive problems from people within the administration. Same thing was true of Fetterman. His role was to get elected. It's far more rigorous to campaign than it is to be a U.S. senator. So if he can't be a U.S. senator and he couldn't campaign, they knew this the entire time. And anybody who voiced concern was accused of ableism. You remember that you were deprecating the health of somebody who was impaired. And then there's the other thing is the asymmetry of it all. When Donald Trump got in that exchange with Kim Jong-il about the buttons and nuclear weapons, they said he was crazy. And all of a sudden we had Rod Rosenstein and Andrew McCabe apparently wearing a wire, or were going to entrap the president to prove that he should be removed. We had Rosa Brooks in foreign policy calling for either a coup or a 25th Amendment removal of Donald Trump because he wasn't fit cognitively. They had this Bandy, remember Hurley, the Yale psychiatrist that they dragged up to Congress, and then she testified that there should be an intervention, straitjacket, remove Donald Trump. And it got so bad finally, he had to take the Montreal Cognitive Assessment by his doctor, Ronnie Jackson. And of course, he aced it. And so when it turns, it's just the same thing that we've seen the entire time. Donald Trump has to be subject to all these things with a mere inference. We even had the chairman of the Joint Chiefs call his Chinese counterpart to say Donald Trump may be kind of crazy if he orders me to do something I don't like in the DEFCON 5 or something, then I will call you in advance. So they're very sensitive about cognitive abilities and leadership, except when it applies to them. So I think they think there's a Republican governor now in Pennsylvania. I mean, a Democratic governor in Pennsylvania, and Fetterman did his job. He got elected, and now the governor can appoint somebody who's more effective.
Right. Well, you're exactly right. So now the New York Times is totally fine reporting on the severity of his condition because they know the seat's secure. We don't need it doesn't have to be John Fetterman. Look at him. He's a disaster. Let's get somebody else in there.
Absolutely.
Let's make it his wife. Yeah. Let's do somebody. But yeah, we admit the guy's not fit to serve. They didn't say it in those words, but they're talking
they
about
don't want him, Meg.
Go ahead.
I don't think they want him ill and then not resigning. So when a very close Senate, they don't want him saying in hospital and saying, no, this is my Senate seat. I'm not going to give it up, but he has to be there in person to vote. And so in some cases, if a Joe Manchin defected or something, the margin's so thin that they don't want to take that chance that he might be, unable to physically get into the Senate and cast a vote. I'm recalling Pete Wilson once when he had a ruptured appendix, they dragged him in, remember, on a gurney to vote in person. They needed that one vote. And so I think they're really worried that he just got elected. He doesn't want to give up his seat, and they want to build a case that it's time for him to bow out. He did his duty, and they want somebody that's more hale and would be there in person for every vote. And they can't count on him to do that.
Here's some more color from the piece, just in case our listening audience had any doubt about what you're saying. Again, this is the New York Times. The latest health scare convinced his staff that Mr. Fetterman needs a better plan to take care of himself, both physically and emotionally. Aides and confidants describe his introduction to the Senate as a difficult period filled with unfamiliar duties that are taxing for someone still in recovery. The beginning of the piece went through all the accommodations they're having to make for this guy all over the Senate. The most evident disability is a neurological condition that impairs his hearing. He suffers from auditory processing issues. The hearing issues are inconsistent. They often get worse when he is in a stressful or unfamiliar situation. When it's bad, Fetterman has described it as trying to make out the muffled voices of the teacher in the Peanuts cartoon whose words could never be deciphered. Then they go on to say that the stroke, which of course led to a pacemaker and a defibrillator being implanted, also took a less apparent but very real psychological toll on Mr. Fetterman. It's been less than a year since the stroke transformed him from someone with a large stature that suggested machismo into a physically altered version of himself. He's frustrated at times. They go on to say he has come to terms with the fact that he may have set himself back permanently by not taking the recommended amount of rest during the campaign, and he continues to push himself in ways people close to him worry are detrimental. I mean, this is about as close as the New York Times will ever get to saying he can't do the job.
Yeah, and everything they wrote was visible in the debate with Dr. Oz. Everybody said that. He was deer in the headlights. It was kind of tragic that they put him in that situation. But a lot of us wrote that was pretty much prima facie evidence that he was non-compos mentis. And when you wrote that, people got very angry. Anybody who wrote that was considered cruel and unfair, and that his debate performance wasn't that bad, and maybe it was a draw, and you could have used every word the New York Times just wrote to characterize how he performed in the debate. Everybody knew that. And the New York Times has lost all credibility. It's just simply an extension. It's fused with the Democratic Party, and that's tragic too. But you can't believe anything it says at any given time.
Do you remember the fierce backlash against the NBC reporter Dasha Burns, who interviewed him and said he had auditory processing issues and he had comprehension issues and he wasn't speaking correctly, even in the small talk leading up to the interview? And the pile-on, Victor. I mean, the one I remember in particular was Kara Swisher, who was like, who is this moron, essentially, saying this kind of thing about, one of this respected man who obviously has had minor issues. And I interviewed him. He was just fine. Here's what she said. Sorry to issue, this is Kara Fisher at the time. Sorry to say, but I talked to John Fetterman for over an hour without stop or any aides. And this is just nonsense. Maybe this reporter is just bad at small talk. Well, maybe Kara Swisher needs to go talk to the place she used to write for, New York Times, and figure out why they're now saying it's severe and that he's not handling his responsibilities well in the Senate. He pushed it too far and too fast, and there are real questions about whether he's capable of doing the job. Where is this Dasha Burns going to go for her apology?
Nowhere. And what's funny about that is that they accused the other reporter of unprofessionalism for disclosing what was supposed to be pre-interview chat that was quote unquote off the record. And then the person who was trying to refute that was off the record and saying, I talked to him. It wasn't in a formal interview. It was chit chat. So she was using chit chat as a legitimate way of refuting somebody who had remarked about chit chat, but that was unprofessional. If it was negative, it's only professional if it's positive. Everything about him is so about the Times reporting and in general, the Washington Post, NPR is so asymmetrical. And I guess that was one of the contributions that Trump did inadvertently, that he reminded everybody that we don't have a media in the traditional sense of the disinterested word. It doesn't exist anymore.
I'm just looking at some more of this. These are some of the people who came out. Okay, just as a reminder, because we like to keep the receipts. Rebecca Traister of New York Magazine in The Cut tweeted she had recently interviewed Fetterman, found his comprehension not at all impaired. He understands everything. It's just that he reads it and responds in real time. And I mentioned the Kara Swisher, Molly Jong-Fast, another journalist and podcast host. She too recently interviewed Fetterman. He understood everything I was saying. He was funny. New York Times correspondent Jonathan Martin tweeted, "It was a rough clip for Fetterman." He actually was on the other side. And will only fuel questions about his health. And we could go on from there. Look, you did the tough thing during COVID. You paid your people and pulled your business through the pandemic. And now doing the tough thing could qualify you for up to $26,000 per employee at covidtaxrelief.org. Government funds are available right now to reward companies with 2 or more employees who stayed open during COVID. It's not a loan, and you don't have to pay it back. The program, of course, is complicated, but nobody knows more about it than the CPAs and tax experts at covidtaxrelief.org. You pay nothing up front. They do all the work. They figure out how to get you money if you qualify, and then they'll share a percentage of the cash they get for you. Businesses of all types, including nonprofits and churches, can qualify for this, including those who took PPP loans, even if you had increases in sales. You did the tough thing for your employees during COVID. Let covidtaxrelief.org do the tough thing for you right now, and that is manage the paperwork and the administrative headaches that they pose between you and your money to help you get up to $26,000 per employee. You may be sitting on a pot of money and you don't even know it. Go to covidtaxrelief.org, 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 and check it out. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.